We'll set the context in three topics. I think the first is about growth. The industry has seen some really good growth over the past years. I think it would be great to hear the panelists' view on the drivers of growth and where we go from there. The second section will deep dive a little bit into the product, channel, customer choices. We've done a bit of research. The time permitting, we'll talk about some of our findings, especially around the COVID side. And the third, talk a bit about industry structure and competitive landscape. So the Indian asset management industry is about 26 trillion rupees, 25 lakh crores. It's a very large number. I know when I started consulting in 2000, we used to talk about, when will we reach 5,000 crores AUM? When will we reach 10,000 crores AUM? And when will we reach 1 lakh crores AUM? And it's a very large industry now. And I think the other very heartening thing is that despite, constant pressure on expense ratios, the industry has kept growing by and large profitably, and effectively passed on some of that, scale benefit to investors and customers. So I think it's been a great story, especially last, 4-5 years have been truly outstanding in the way the industry has grown. And what has driven this, and we'll of course hear the experts, but I think what's really heartening is that there has been a very consistent and secular growth in folios, which means new investors coming in, investing and staying put. And by and large, folio sizes have also crept up. Yes, March 20 was bad, but that was COVID. But if you take that out, I think there's been it's been a good growth for an industry that's inherently participating in assets where market risk exists, where MTMs and NAVs change, to deliver consistent growth on folios and average holding per folio is absolutely creditable. And obviously, the SIP story, it's a great example of how maybe somewhat uncelebrated, unsung, but really retail granular money has come into the industry. It's really helped take the industry to the next level. I don't think we would have seen this level of 25 trillion rupees, but for the support that the industry got from the SIPs. One of the issues, especially in the last 2-3 years, has been debt. I think the debt products have been losing sheen of bunch of reasons: the NBFC crisis, credit risks in the portfolios of some of the funds, and we know stuff that's happened. But it's an important asset class, and I think one of the questions is, as we go from FY20 onwards, going forward, how does the industry think of getting back some of the great work that it used to do on the debt side? And there are a few other questions as well, but by and large, if you look at it top down, there is a massive amount of headroom. I mean, Indian asset management industry is minuscule. It's a fourth of bank loans today. The largest bank is bigger than the entire industry. And if you look at any benchmarks, I think no one is questioning the headroom to grow. So I think clearly, from a top-down perspective, there is enough legs for the industry to run. I think there are questions around what those products, segments, what are drivers, and we can talk about that. But I think we are all very convinced about the long-term growth prospects of the industry. Let me go and talk a bit about the product side and distribution and so on and so forth. I think one of the big changes that has happened in the last few years is the tremendous traction that direct plans have got, right? And this is across scheme types. If you look at the red graph in each of these charts, whether you look at equity-based AUMs, you look at debt funds, or you look at other products, direct plans are the fastest growing channel today. Yes, some of this could be assisted and advised money, but it's still growing at a fairly fast clip. And I think this is going to ask a significant amount of questions on how asset managers, particularly mutual fund asset managers, think about distribution. The second is a segment mix. One of the big success stories has been the retail participation. And if you look at the dark blue line, that's actually again one of the fastest growing worms across product categories. It's about 20% CAGR on equity, and despite all the things we talked about on debt, still about 12.5% CAGR on debt. The other funds are categories smaller, but decent growth rate. I think one of the questions here has been HNI, which is the light blue line that's right at the bottom of the chart. It doesn't seem to be changing its trajectory, seems to be flat, and I think the industry should be thinking about how can it get back the HNI money, right? It's very attractive money. It's probably long term. How does industry think about getting this money? And as we talk about HNI, one of the trends that has happened in the last few years, but certainly in the last 3 months of COVID, is there's been a massive uptake in active accounts in the brokerage world, right? And this is frankly unprecedented growth. The last 3 months, brokers have added more accounts than in each of the last 2 years, right? And I think some of this is, of course, people probably sitting at home, trying their hand at trading, what have you. But I think there's certainly a question in terms of how does the mutual fund industry compete with the broking industry? Ultimately, the destination of both is equities. Right? I think something that the industry probably needs to reflect on and say what really is its offering and positioning, particularly vis-a-vis the broking customers. The last question in this sort of deep dive from the way we saw the data is the market development. And the question is, the Indian mutual fund industry still a T30 story? And you'll see not only is the top 30 AUM large, that's understandable. In any financial market, you do expect that to happen, but it's growing faster in pretty much every product category. Right? And while on the one hand, we should take pride that the industry has, built a market, gone deep. You got so many folios in their fold. But it seems to be very large city-centric. How do we deepen the market? How do we go below the top 30 centers? Is there a market? Intuitively, one would think so. Yes. The question is, how do we get there? And the last sort of section that I would like to just present before I hand over to the panelists is the industry structure and the competitive landscape. It's a fairly consolidated industry. The share of top 3, top 5, top 10 is quite high and frankly, increasing. And therefore, on the one hand, we talk about how does the industry go from 25 trillion rupees to 50 trillion rupees in the next 4, 5, 6 years. On the other hand, we've got a fairly concentrated market structure. Right? So who are going to be the people who are going to come in, new players, new ideas, new products? How is this going to shape up? Or is it going to be more and more concentrated? And the other question, of course, is profitability. And, we tried plotting PAT. We don't have FY20 numbers for all the funds yet, but we tried plotting PAT of FY19 with the average AUM. And you pretty much see, and we tried that with full fee AUM as well, and you see pretty much a straight line correlation. And which means if you sort of drag a line down and ask the question, at what scale does a mutual fund or asset manager really start making serious money? It seems like the answer is 40 to 60,000 crores AUM. Now that's a fairly large AUM for someone setting up shop, coming in, to set up a fund house in India. That's a pretty stiff ask. For a new player. Do we need new players? Do we need new ideas? Do we need some of the other players to come in, global players to come in? I don't know the answer to that, but it does seem that the break-even has shifted away, right? And when we started looking at, Rajiv and Karan and we used to discuss, is the break-even 10,000 crores or 15,000 crores? It just seems to have leapt up to 40, 50,000 crores. And therefore, what does this mean for the industry structure? We're also seeing in FY19 numbers, maybe just 1 year, but we're seeing a couple of the large fund houses actually work on costs and use that as a lever to improve profitability. Is that something that the industry, as it has matured, is that something the industry is looking to do? Maybe it coincides with the direct plans. But again, I think it would be interesting to hear the panel's views on profitability. Does size matter? Is size the only thing? Are there other things that the industry can do? So I'm going to just stop here and really hand the floor over back to Karan and sort of talk through and have the panelists talk through their views on this. Kalpin has just joined. Thanks, Kalpin, for dialing. Sorry for the trouble logging in. Karan, back to you.
Thanks, Ishan. And I'm actually quite happy to be on Kalpin's screen. So, Kalpin, if you don't mind, then I'm happy to be Karan in your shoes for a while.
The other way around.
Okay. Sichit, thanks for giving us those slides. And like I was telling my co-panelists and also the audience the other day, I mean, we were talking about this and I just found the slides to be very informative and insightful. And I'm going to start with Radhika, ladies first. And Radhika, you saw the initial slides that Praxis has put together, and you've seen the inflection points starting to kick in on the industry, and certainly in the last 4 to 5 years. What I wanted you to do is just set the tone for us right now, and just share with us what do you think has been some of those key 3 to 4 points that have really helped the industry grow. Has it been regulatory? Has it been demonetization? Has it just been the fact that good set of advisors have stepped in? What would you kind of say that in the last 4 to 5 years, the industry has really taken up the hockey stick, at least the proverbial hockey stick?
Hi everyone, thanks Praxis team for having me. And before I start mutual fund style, this time I have to offer a disclaimer. My internet connection on a usual day is really bad. So today are subject to being kicked out. So if that happens, just please forgive me midway, and I'll make sure I'll come back right in. I think actually 2 points on this. So I joined this industry about 3.5 years ago, and I think I've probably seen the industry in growth only mode. I probably haven't seen that period of lull in the past. So maybe we should do a deep dive into the past with Kalpen, who is far older and far more tenured than me. But on a serious note, I think the growth in the last few years partly has been inevitable because there is a broader financialization story that any emerging economy is going to see, and I don't think India should be separate for it. I think demonetization was a tremendous impetus for that. That said, I think to say that we hit a hockey stick is way too early. If you look at the number of people paying income tax, or if you look at the number of people who have LIC policies in the country, versus the fact that we have 2 million investors, I think we are far more hitting a hockey stick. Slides, and if you just look at some of the numbers in the Praxis slides, I think net penetration to GDP is 11% in India, and that includes of public money, but that is way off the global average, forget even any developed market. So I think we are far away from that. That said, I think it is inevitable growth. Indians are going to get more aspirational. Young Indians are far more aspirational, and I think I represent at least some part of that millennial generation than those who are looking for traditional investments as a mode of investment. So I think that has been one driver. Financialization and demonetization has definitely been a second driver. The industry has also come together, and you can't take away from movements like mutual fund Sahi Hai, what the advisor community has done. I mean, I remember over the last 2-3 years as one traveled, and this is pre-COVID, of course, and I would go through these security checks at airports, and even the security we were checking, we would say, at that point, is that we can't do as a director for mutual fund. 2 years ago, if I went to my portfolio, they would say a bank, but after at least mutual fund and definitely SIP, good or bad, has become a buzzword. So I think a couple of factors have come together, but it is still early days in my view to celebrate. I think it's an industry that is probably still in its not even players, but late.
So Radhika, part of the answer we would have all missed because the net's acting up, but I kind of get the gist of what you were trying to say. So Kalpen, just getting you into this discussion, I remember early days when you and I when I was on the other side, on the distribution side, I know you were working at iProve. And our big challenge at that time used to be this big focus on institutional sales and much lesser on retail. How the game has changed over the last 7-8 years has been quite, actually to my mind, has been the biggest change that has happened. You may want to just take everyone through that whole space, how the industry shifted focus from institutional sales to retail and kind of building the retail piece out. Hearing from you, that would be, I think that'd be nice to hear.
Thanks, Karan, and my apologies for joining in late and the trouble I had to put you through. Sorry for that. I'll start with one disclaimer that I claim to myself as well as to my entire team internally as well, that avoid labeling. And the biggest danger in investing is labelization. So I have always felt that, if you notice, the collapse in market cap of banks and financial institutions has coincided with this huge wave of the label called financialization of savings. Jab se financialization of savings as a theme has become a part of every analyst or consultant report, or every fund manager's hypothesis for having 30, 35, 40% weights in benchmark, is when that theme has not played out. So I look at the evolution of the industry beyond labels, because sometimes labels make it very easy for us to contextualize, but it can actually put us into a wrong trap. So my hypothesis is that the growth or the cycle of the fund industry's up cycle or down cycle is an outcome of where are the flows moving. Whenever corporate India has been into a heavy capex mode, they will not have enough capital to park in short-term debt mutual funds, and those are the times when the AUMs are lesser. And whenever capacity utilization is low, thus meaning companies are preserving cash, not investing aggressively when outlook on the economy is weak. When outlook in sectors is weak, they have huge surpluses, and these are times when interest rates fall. And also when interest rates fall, companies go and borrow a lot more because they want to take advantage of lower interest rates. And some of these short-term surpluses find their way into the mutual fund. So sometimes the growth or the surge in AUMs is not because of the economic outlook being better. It's actually on the contrary, the other way around, that the economic outlook is bad. Companies, promoters, large family offices or HNIs are preserving capital and allocating to the industry. Likewise, on the other hand, the second large component, see, even today, Karan, even then when I was serving you, and even today while I continue to serve you, the split between institutional and non-institutional business was 50-50. So that split has truly not changed, even though I think 20 years have passed, but the split more or less remains the same. And capital pools are a function of the wealth of the country. And the country's wealth is the savings that companies have and the savings that individuals have. Now, as a country, while we continue to feel great about the fact that we will someday move from $1,000 per capita to currently, let's say, 1,800 and eventually to 5,000 or 6,000, when that shift happens is when consumers will have a lot more money in their hands to truly save in a discretionary way. Till that does not happen, and that to me will be a structural shift in the industry. Till that does not happen, everything in our industry is cyclical. Our industry is not a structural industry, in my view. A lot of analysis, sometimes hides the fact that there are, different pockets of asset classes and customer segments which bring the secularity. So there are times when retail flows are large and corporate flows are less, but the industry may still see growth, and vice versa. Now, the retail pool of money world over, including in India, because as human beings, we like to invest where recent returns are very high. The growth of our industry in the last 5 years has again, and like always before, we just need to plot the Nifty and the growth of equity flows. That will tell us the answer to everything else. It is not so much about what have we done from a business model design point of view, or what has been the strategization as an industry, or the mutual fund Sahi campaign and stuff like that. It is clearly, I give more credit to the growth of the industry, to the strength of the asset class or the weakness of the asset class. So if equity as an asset class does well, equity flows improve. If equity as an asset class does not do well, flows don't improve. So we will oscillate between mutual fund Sahi hai and mutual fund nahi hai. Those cycles will continue. When interest rates fall and past returns of debt funds look very good, a lot of money will go into debt funds. So I think the one thing I want to express with all humility here is that it is the pattern of the market and the asset class which determines the growth of the industry. It's a massively cyclical industry. No doubt there have been small trends of more towns coming in, more brokers coming in, but one should see that in the month of March, did more point of sale sell equity products or no? And the data says that actually the number of point of sales has actually reduced in the last 6 months. So if the hypothesis is right that expansion has happened, more people have joined in the industry, then why every time markets fall by 25-30%, the point of sales actually start shrinking? The number of brokerage checks that we give start shrinking. So the correlation is more to the asset class than to build-up of distribution or build-up of expansion as an industry in smaller towns. My hunch is that if the economic environment remains weak, if job losses are, staring, every part of the economy, if salary cuts are staring every part of the economy, and if the cycle slows down, we will see, all the statistics which were favorable for us look very different. So I always look at, very coincidentally, the first 4 years of a decade are very tough for the industry. So 2000 to 2004 were very bad for the industry because the economy was bad. And that's when Karan, me and you had a lot of time to have coffee because kaam nahi tha zyada. Likewise, 2009 to 14, the second phase of the decade, the first 4 years again, we were coming out of GFC, slowing economy, slowing cash flows. And equity flows were virtually zero to negative. And then in the next round, again, a cycle kicks up, volumes go up, and then the cycle turns. So I think we are again in the last, in that leg of a down cycle. This month will be 6,000 crores negative flows as an industry after almost 48 months. So after 48 months of glory, we are seeing some amount of normalization. I hope this is not the beginning of a cycle of slowdown. I hope this is temporary for our collective good, and but let's see how it plays out. So I have a slightly different take to the whole equation, that the growth of the industry is at the mercy of the growth of an asset class, not so much about what we do or what we don't.
I think that's, I kind of agree to that extent, because also what has happened is we've probably not had the right institutional investors still coming into the market. Absolutely. Which is what the West has got. And so that gap is always felt. And I think the point you made on cyclical versus structural is quite valid. And the next question then kind of dives into what Arun has done in the past, which is run a broking firm and a securities firm. Arun, I think Kalpen makes a very valid point on the business being probably still cyclical and not structural, and that I think is quite visible in your business. What you've seen in the past and what we're seeing today also. Suddenly the retail the folios, opening accounts, etc. has really shot up, and let's see what's happened in the markets. You want to just add to what Kalpen has said? Any thoughts on that?
Thanks, Karan, and thanks, Plexus. So I think to start with, Kalpen has given the entire credit to the equity as an asset class. Maybe I would like to give him back some credit, because whatever mutual funds have done, the awareness campaign, it has really helped. Even if you agree or don't agree, but that has actually helped. And over last 4 years, from 2016 onwards, whether Demon has helped, yes, whether there is the TINA factor, that there was no other alternative, that has helped. And yes, mutual fund Sahi Hai also has helped. So I think if you look at from 16 to 17 and 17 to 18, that 5 lakh crore each year. So maybe first 20 years you had 10 lakh crore, in the last 4 years you have almost doubled from 12 to 13 lakh to now 26 lakh crore. So I think that has really changed. So more and more people, and I agree with you to that extent, that equity as an asset class has done well. 2017 was a great bumper year. And going ahead, let's see. And I think Radhika talked about the percentage of GDP, that glass half full or half empty. Maybe right now we are at 11% of the GDP. And if you look at the equity AUM, that is even lower. Maybe if you look at the overall global equity AUM should be around 45%, and we are at maybe 10% or 8%. So I think that number gives you some kind of a comfort also. Now coming back to Karan's question, that now at the moment, yes, if you look at the volume in the broking industry, the kind of accounts, and just today I was reading an article in Financial Express. It says that July turnover, the daily average turnover in F&O is around 16 lakh crore, and the cash is around 51,000 crore. So the average for the last year was around 40,000 crore and around 14 lakh crore for the F&O. So even if there was some volatility curve by SEBI, still the cash volumes and F&O volumes have gone up. So I think that is a fact. And as Shishir also talked about when he was making presentation, that maybe more people are sitting at home, there is no activity across the world. Earlier people used to go out, do some kind of a betting, maybe go for some sports match. Now everybody is trading. And for them, last three months have been good. If you look at the overall trending market, so they have been happy so far. And now there will be some more curves coming from 1st September on the margin front. So let us see how long this story plays. But at the end of the day, I think people have to come back to mutual fund. That is my belief. because the right kind of advice, the right kind of investment, this adrenaline kick will somehow slow down at some point of time, and the flows should come back to mutual funds. Maybe we have to do certain things right, and I think they will come back. Yes, I am worried about what Shishir talked about, that HNI segment, whether they will come back or they will still stay out and not participate fully. But retail should come back fast.
So retail should come back faster, and I want to dive straight into my next question, which is, I'll start with Radhika, and Kalpin, you can add on to that. Is this whole SIP story that SIP actually is almost turned out to be a crusade for the mutual fund industry. It's almost kind of been something that we work very hard on, and starting to see at least the initial benefits. It's now 8,000 crores per month, and maybe there's a bit of a dip. So Radhika, given that that's starting to look a little more structural, do you think it has the potential to become one of the industry's biggest success stories over the next 5 and 7 years as we start to build out the SIPs? We can start with your answer, and Kalpin, I'd like to hear from you as well on the entire focus around SIPs, primarily on the retail focus for building a book.
I think, firstly, I think SIP is highly misinterpreted. SIP is not a product, it's not a magic. I keep telling retail consumers every time I meet them, SIP is not a new.
Will it be better for you if you were to switch off the video? Do you think the audio would be better? Because we're struggling a bit.
Is it clearer now?
Yes.
Yes, much better.
Okay, I will try and do this. Sorry, as I said, connectivity is really bad. So I think firstly, we misunderstand SIP, and there is obsessive amount of reporting about the SIP book. Let me just start with that. The first thing I do when I meet consumers is I tell them SIP is not a product you're investing in. It's a way of investing. It's a feature. To that extent, I think SIP and the use of SIP as a feature has been very, very creditable for the industry. I have been personally a believer in SIP well before I joined the mutual fund industry, because I just think it does two things. It removes that element of market timing, which is virtually impossible to do in equities. And second, I think SIP it's saving discipline. I mean, I always say that the reason I do SIPs is, they make sure that a certain percentage of my income, whatever it is, 30, 40, 20%, mandatorily goes into saving. I think of it as my saving and investing tax. My SIP is that. So I think culturally it has a very, very important role. It is very important to realize that most of the SIP growth has happened in the last 2 to 3 years when SIP returns have been good and when equity market returns have been good. I think the merit of the SIP story will play out if we can continue to sustain the equity book through the difficult market conditions that we are going through. In fact, whenever we look at any data point, I mean, we were just looking at some data points at Edelweiss. If you look at scenarios where markets returned less than 8%, in the 0 to 8% bracket, even then your investor SIP returns for the 10-year SIP are over 9%. Your market returns may be 6%, but your SIP returns are 9%. So I think SIPs do a lot in helping the investor experience, and they do a lot more of it in poor markets because the SIP value really kicks in. But I'm also cognizant that a lot of SIP money came in the last 2-3 years. And for this story to really play out, you need to see it last for the next few years. So if the SIP book, which was at 8,500 crores, if it still stays at 7,500 crores, if it doesn't shrink too much, I think there's something that we can be proud of. Of course, there will be some natural cut and shrinkage because ultimately the economy is going through a tough cycle. Participants in the economy are SIP investors. If people have challenges with jobs, etc., that will reflect. But net, I think it is very good for the industry. I would look forward to seeing its growth and its sustainability over the next 2 to 3 years.
Kalpin, you want to add on to that?
I think SIP is, one saving grace where as a pattern of saving, people have adopted. And because truly speaking, 70-80% of the consumers of mutual fund, not from an amount point of view, but number of users, they have monthly income. So SIP is nothing but conversion of that monthly income into monthly saving. And like Radhika said, SIPs can be in any product category. It doesn't have to be in equity. It's just about the way of investing. So very heartening to see that the book has been built. What I hope not to see is a repeat of 2010 to 13 again, where 67% of SIPs had stopped. And that will be the true test for all of us as the ecosystem, the way we communicate, the way we guide investors, the way we handhold them. Because truly speaking, if let's say I were to do 10-year SIP, which is 120 installments, it is only those 30% installments which are done in a period of crisis when prices are cheap are the ones which actually add to returns. The balance 70% of installments which happen either in rising NAV or consolidating NAV are not the ones which actually contribute to return. Now, unfortunately, in that pattern, this was the pattern. 1/3 of times NAVs used to be cheaper, 1/3 they would be flat, and 1/3 times they would be rising. This time around, what has happened is we saw a crisis, which is what we are going through right now. But we got only 1 month installment at very cheap prices, which was the month of March. So if let's say you're doing a 12-month SIP, only the installment of March would have given you great returns. Again, quickly in April, May, June, the NAVs have gone up. So the biggest benefit of SIP is acquiring units in bad markets also. So while we are in a bad economy, but we are still not getting great NAVs at lower prices. I would have loved for this cycle of poor NAVs to have lasted for long. So all these SIPs would have acquired higher number of units. And then someday, 5 years later, all these units at a better price would have created a 10, 12, 13% return. I'll tell you some statistic, which is for DSP, but which is true, I think, for every mutual fund. Less than, or rather, 68% of investors in the industry would make less than savings account return or less than fixed deposit return. Purely because of the pattern of buying high and selling low. Because most money has always come at market high. So we did this exercise for DSP. We asked CAMS to validate this for the rest of the industry, and they said that roughly 68 to 72% of the folios earn less than savings account or fixed deposit return. So when you look back a bit philosophically,
This is a study that you all did on your own funds, but on the SIP.
On all folios. So let's say we have 24 lakh live folios. We have 24 lakh live investors, and if I were to do the same for investors who have gone out. Generally, investors go out not because their goals are met, but they go out because they are unhappy with their returns. So if I add that, the statistic would have been poorer. So very philosophically, when we contextualize the growth of the industry and the momentum in the industry, the question to also ask is that what is the value we are adding to the consumer finally? Because ultimately, for scalable businesses, for profitable long-term brand building, is the customer making money? If by doing nothing, if fixed deposits were giving him on an average, let's say 7% return, and I'm not bringing the tax argument here, because tax is something we are not adding value. That is the value government of India is giving. So like to like, if 7% is the threshold return we should give, and for the volatility of equity, I should add another 3-4% more. What percentage of the 2 crore folios have earned more than 11% return? If you were to just do that analysis, that number will be around 20 to 25%. And the rest of it, so I think those are the areas to really try to innovate for or solve for. That how do we make the experience of the investor, one, better than where he's coming from, which is the fixed deposits. 2, better than what he would have got very easily, which is Nifty. Passive funds can give you, Nifty will give, let's say, X return. Our job is to give more than X because we are charging management fees. And 3rd, those returns should be in line with his expectations. The unfortunate part is a lot of misbuying also happens, where expectation of investors are 14-15% CAGR. You ask anyone, what is the return that Sensex has given? Everyone says 15% CAGR. But when you plot for last 40 years, only 3 years, the return was 15%. 37 years, the return was -30, +100, -50, all over the place. So the return that investors take back from us is never 15. It's probably half of 15. So are we adding value to Indians at large? While our boardrooms will have a lot of lofty statements, but are we truly adding value? That's a question that keeps me awake at times, and that's something that we should be solving for.
I think it's really like a mirror moment when you did that internally, and I'm sure it can be easily extended to most mutual fund houses, because fundamentally what you're saying is correct. So which gets me to the question of the distribution community, Arun. And for a change, I'd like you to wear the distribution hat. You've seen both Radhika and Kalpen speak about the fact that while the products can be as good as they can be, fact of the matter is that there is a lot of misbuying that happens on behalf of the customer. And most mutual funds, in fact, all of them don't speak directly to customer. There is the role of a distributor out here. How do you see this from the distributor's point of view? The fact that funds have delivered, but investors have not really gained. Any views around that, Arun, from your point of view or from your experience?
Yeah, so the role of distributor is very, very important because as you said, the manufacturer has delivered. So the goodie has come to the distributor. Now, whether they are distributing, so there are different channels, whether they are going through a bank or there is a financial planner or there is a RIA or nowadays maybe there are a lot of things are like on direct platform also. So now the role of distributor becomes very, very important and the right selling, because I have another avatar. I am with the FPSB, Financial Planning Standard Board, and I keep talking to a lot of practitioners. And the role of these practitioner also becomes very, very important because they don't only look at the commission. If they are the right kind of financial planners, they look at the every stage and they look at the financial goal. They look at the income, they look at the expenses, they look at the assets and liability. They don't only sell investment product. And maybe when they are selling, yes, there are sometimes not the right kind of selling. Maybe so there are needs of a customer. Somebody wants for living expenses. Then there are wants. Somebody wants to go abroad and he wants to have that financial goal. Somebody has some dream. Maybe he wants to have some hobby, put money into charity. And finally, the legacy, that somebody is only investing for the next generation. And how these needs are then matched when the actual selling is done, I think that is very important. Sometimes, yes, it is not done right. And so SIP that way is also the right way of selling, because what Kalpen said, Kalpen talked about the return from one point to another point and the expectation. When you talk to anyone, then everybody says 15%, 17%, but it is not so. And what also he also said that the last 3 months have not been that great for SIP because you are not able to buy more units with less money. But it is again on the double edge, because if the markets would have been falling, there are some customer would have opted out because they would have seen the money is going down, their investment is coming down. So it can be, so the rupee cost averaging, the benefit has not gone to the customer. But if you tie it to the goal, like Kalpen used to do, he used to come and meet me and he used to show me that on every birthday of his child, he's gifting an SIP. If this way you sell, I think then you are able to connect. And coming back to the distributor, yes, distributors have now the challenge of a direct plan also. So there are issues. If you look at a bank distribution, then if they can't sell it from the bank platform, then there is a subsidiary channel, the investor advisor channel. So maybe they are doing it through direct. So maybe this mutual fund companies have to think that whether to get into the direct plans or only look at the distributor channel. Maybe at some point of time you have to take a call whether to encourage direct distribution or only go through the distributor or through a bank or some other channel.
So I'll come back to the distribution conundrum that AMCs also face. But Radhika, the other day you and I were discussing this, and you made the point that I think it's time for mutual funds to stop focusing on products and starting to become solution providers. And I know, Kalpen, you also deeply believe in asset allocation. Both of you all are talking the same language, so that the journey gets a little less volatile and much, the experience is better. Any ideas, both Radhika, you and Kalpen, on what you all mean by your forms of asset allocation, and Radhika, what you mean by solutions and not just products?
Go to Radhika first.
Yeah, Radhika.
Kalpen, you can speak first if you want.
Kalpen, you want to start?
Okay.
You started.
I think there are two things. In everything in life, there is duality. You don't have singularity, that only one way will work or one style will work. And I very nice that Arun remembered something that very passionately I used to show, which was with the belief that investing, for success in investing, you need to have rational money management. But to convert an investor, you need emotional conversation. It has to be a blend of both. What I have noticed is, when do things fail? When we do everything rationally or we do everything emotionally. So emotional selling of products alone can be misleading, can create mis-selling. At the same time, only rationally showing charts and data can also, switch off a customer and curtail the growth of the industry. I really resonated a lot with what you said, Arun, that goals are very important. If investments are connected to goals, it brings longevity in the life cycle of an investor. And the moment there is longevity, automatically all cycles are captured, and you ultimately end up earning the return that a full cycle offers. What is the problem we are trying to solve? The problem we are trying to solve is that the market cycles are generally longer than the investor's capital cycle. Because traditionally investors are investing for only 3 or 4 years. That's what data says, that if we take all the folios which have come in and gone out, on an average, the average stay of an investor is around 3.5-4 years. Whereas a full market cycle could be around 7 to 8 years. We want an investor to capture a full cycle, and ideally, not come at the peak and capture the down cycle, but do the opposite. This can be possible by blending emotional design of products by bringing goal-based product design, which is either on education, or which is about a zero salary life. Very few people are blessed like you, Karan, that even without a job you will have a crore salary life. But most people once they retire will have a zero salary life. How do we bring that reality and then blend it with the rationality of asset allocation, which means accepting that asset classes always don't operate in fair value. They are sometimes stretched on being very expensive or being very cheap, and that's where asset allocation of saying when should you be overweight equity or underweight equity becomes important. Now, this can be solved partly by presence of great distribution, pipelines, which is good advisors in between who do it for customers. This can also be solved by product design. And one thing that I'm proud of as a part of the fund industry in the last few years is the emergence of the category of asset allocation fund. That category has now become closer to 70,000-80,000 crores. So it's around 8 to 9% of the entire equity pool. So it says that when markets are very euphoric, we will be underweight equity, and vice versa. So blending these two things together, sound data-driven scientific principles of asset allocation with emotional design of products, emotional way of selling, a blend is more useful than any one in isolation. Just using a data-driven approach also will not create growth in the industry. Just using an emotional approach will create a lot of unnecessarily high expectations and poor eventual results. So a blend is something which I believe is a good opportunity for the industry to further work on and accelerate.
Yeah, I think it's a good point you make, 80,000 crores. And I think this time the experience, just the usage of those funds is also expanded in the distribution community as well as on the manufacturing side. The language also changed quite dramatically.
You launched a very powerful multi-asset. I wish that fund would have been one of the largest. With the way gold is moving right now, I remember one of the funds that you had brought to the market 4 or 5 years back.
We used to call it Triple Advantage. It's still Triple Advantage, and with the same intent.
Same thought.
Managers will not know which asset class is going up, and so will distribution. So if you just kind of equate, you probably get the best of all three worlds. So Radhika, what about your thoughts and the point that you were making to me the other day that it's time to stop selling products and starting to get into the whole space of solutions?
So my point on asset allocation and the need for asset allocation is actually very basic. Is that if you look at most investors globally, and I think especially in the Indian context, we are not very volatility friendly investors. And there's some great data we are putting out in this month's fact sheet around this, but we fundamentally do not handle high volatility well. Anytime you have a period, everybody knows that equity money comes in and at the top of the cycle and it goes out at, when it shouldn't, and all that stuff. Investor returns are not in line with index returns. Everybody knows that stuff. And I think it's our job as an industry not to sell products, but to ensure that where we are at our stage of evolution in India, that we bring in more investors into the industry and those investors stay in the industry. Now, those investors are only going to stay in the industry if they have a reasonable experience. And again, my second belief is that most people, while they forecast and talk about 12 to 15% equity returns, are quite happy earning a moderate return, but with reasonable levels of risk. When their portfolios start falling 20 and 30 and 40%, it triggers something in them. So I think minimizing volatility is very, very important, or reducing volatility is very important. There are enough studies to say that plus 10 minus 5 versus plus 30 minus 25 is not the same thing. And also volatility, I think, brings out the worst of investor behavior. In fact, I was looking at a study that Dalbar did yesterday, and it said two things. It said, one, on average, investors underperform broad markets. But if you look at when those periods of underperformance happen, they happen when tail events happen, in extreme negative and extreme positive markets. Because all that stuff happens. You start believing stories, you exit in a panic, you switch from small cap to overnight fund in March, all that stuff happens. So volatility is not something we handle well. And I think the best way to control volatility is asset allocation. It can be done directly, as Kalpen said, through good advisory. But periodically I have these people coming to me saying the market's at 11,000. If I know it's going to go to 7,000, should I sell everything and go to, buy at 7,000? And my only point is, one, nobody can time. And secondly, you don't have the emotional wherewithal to buy at 7,000, which is why I also love this category of balanced advantage and dynamic asset allocation funds and anything in that category that's growing. I think our job as an industry is not just to manufacture products, but to manufacture tools that advisors can use and investors can use to stay in the industry for longer. SIP was actually that. It was a solution in some sense. It made equity investing a lot more stable and predictable. I think BAF/asset allocation funds also fall into that same ambit.
I think you make a pretty important point on the ability to handle volatility, because most times we're forever fixated on returns and we're not really calculating the risk that is being taken to generate those returns. And the classic example of that is what has happened in the fixed income space over the last 4-5 months, and especially in the last 3 months. It's just been a bit of a tough ride for investors. And I don't want to get into what happened, because that's very well known. But any thoughts on how, as CEOs of mutual funds, you all then look at those kind of business risks? Because some of those are actually business risks as well, because there are issues around the brand, there are issues around how you then kind of get out of a tough situation like that, because investors are upset, distributors are upset, and sometimes even the regulators are upset. So, Radhika, extending the discussion on volatility, we've already had an event that has happened now, and then in the GFC we had a similar debt event. Does that scare you when you think of running your business?
It doesn't scare me, but I'll be very frank. I think we have, over the last 3 years, between what we've seen in the credit crisis, and funds have not been too much by it because we were not part of the credit story. We also have NBFC parenting. I think these last 3 years have given us a chance to reflect on what we want to do in fixed income and what we don't want to do. And I would highlight what we don't want to do. I think I have two beliefs. One is that if you look at fixed income, the number of retail folios in fixed income funds is paltry. And secondly, a large amount of our fixed income money is very, very short term. I think 60 to 70% of it is under 1 year in nature, and it is largely institutional. So we haven't done a great job of getting too much retail HNI money into this. And I don't think if mutual fund sahi hai has to succeed, it will succeed until fixed income grows, because we are a savings driven country. So succeeding in fixed income is important. Now, in my view, you can do fixed income, and people don't understand fixed income risk as well as they understand equity risk. A small cap fund will be down 25% and no one will complain, but a debt fund will be down 2% because we don't understand credit and duration risk. I think in terms of credit risk, at least we as a house have felt that the open-ended MF platform is not the one that we want to use to take credit risks. It is a fundamentally illiquid market. and you run serious ALM mismatch. So if we want to do that business, and we do that business in other parts of Edelweiss funds, we will do it for institutional clients who understand that risk and who are willing to give us 5 to 7 year capital. In the mutual fund construct, we want to run simple products and simple fixed income products, roll down products like Bharat Bond, bank PSU funds. Those have done well. I don't think you need to do very complex things. Fixed income funds already have a substantial advantage over traditional debt products because of their inherent tax advantage. So we are already starting a little bit ahead. As a business and as a house, given the structure of the credit market, we want to stay away from taking credit risks and just manufacture simple, high quality fixed income funds. I think it's taken us 3 years to come to this sort of thinking, but that's where we stand today.
So I hear what you're saying, and not entirely a related question, but Kalpen, one of the other aspects that the industry now faces is this whole debate between active and passive, and clearly till about 5 years ago, when I used to look at this debate, I still thought that it's still some time away. But the more I look at it, I think I'm beginning to realize that this debate is now getting serious. There is merit to this discussion. Any views on that? And then I'll kind of try and wrap this up in the next 5 6 minutes.
I'll start with the reflection that overall our penetration is barely 4-5%, and at 4 or 5% penetration is very limited. The whole industry is at around 6,000 crores profit pool, and there's a lot of debate on this versus that. I think debates will be fruitful when it is this and that. My anchoring always, and I say this to my team also, that let's not debate whether active will make money or passive will make money. First, let's debate that do we have enough investors to benefit. So with the investor ka base bhi humne touch nahi kiya. We have barely 2 crore investors in a country of, let's say, potentially 20 crore investors. So before we cross certain penetration barriers, some of these debates are nice talking points, fairly intellectual, but they're not value creating. I think the debate should be how do we make money for investors, and in that both have a role to play. There are phases when beta will do very well, which is passive will do very well, and there are phases when people who are having active share or not replicating the entire benchmark portfolios will do very well. And as an investor, you have a choice to be in both till the time there is evidence to say that one is better than the other. Now, of course, one can draw upon global evidence that all flows have gone into passive funds and the same pattern will play out in India. Maybe, so be it. As manufacturers, all of us have the entire range of products available to investors. We should show both to the investors. We should demonstrate the benefits and drawbacks of both to the investors and make investor buy. I think if one shift is made from selling a product to making an investor buy the product, we will achieve significant progress, because the ownership of the product then moves into the hands of the investor. Largely, it is always about we selling a fund, and then things work or don't work, and investor says that I never knew this. So I think there will be challenges to as markets mature, as see, every industry will go through its own phase of tough phases. Generating alpha is getting challenged. We have seen that in the last 4 or 5 years. Good fund managers will generate alpha. And in fact, good fund managers will also not generate alpha in some phases. When they say that, I don't believe in this passive rally right now, I want to stay away from some stocks. And how well do management support active portfolio management will determine how the long-term results of those platforms will be. I feel both will grow, both have room to grow. There are reasons why eliminating stocks from an index can create a lot of value for the investor, and there are phases when passive will shoot the light out of active fund managers. We can design sensible combination products to say when do you have more. Like I do this in my own personal portfolio. The year when Nifty has beaten all my funds, in that year, from my incremental salary, I will invest in my funds. And the year when my funds have huge alpha is when incrementally I will buy into my Nifty. There's no right or wrong answer. It's best we have this and that, active and passive, so that both can grow. Ultimately, we need 20 crore more investors to come into the industry before we debate to death active or passive.
I hear what you're saying, Kalpin. I think the point I was trying to make is that it seemed like a very simple structure even in the West till the advent of passive actually killed the debate in many ways, and this whole
it's become passive there.
Has become passive, and so to many. When I used to speak to our foreign partners, I realized that they're starting to keep an eye out and an ear open to what's happening. It comes back to the point of investor experience, but point taken. It's still something that we've got.
I'll just add that what I meant to say is that passive will obviously become much larger than what it is today, because we are also seeing institutional money coming in from provident funds, from EPFO, which is buying passive, and their own buying will create an impetus for passive to outperform, because you are going to buy more and more of the same stocks. So if today 1 lakh crore is in passive funds and EPFO gives another 2 lakh. So what is happening? The stock is of retail investors, whereas the flow is of institutional investors in the current times. So more and more flow will go into passive, and the stock is eroding to some extent because of the last 5 years of return expectations. So if more money chases passive funds and they buy the same stocks again, there is a high chance that it will be a self-fulfilling cycle. So we'll have to wait and watch how this plays out.
Let's see. So Arun, I just wanted to bring you in before I ask my last set of questions. I know we kind of. I just had this question on how life has actually changed with the advent of platforms and technology. I have some friends. Their son is 18 years old. And as an 18-year-old, my conversation with him the other day was his ability to buy stocks. He was on the platform, busy buying a couple of stocks, and I was just wondering that at 18, I didn't even know the spelling of stocks. So, how do you see this entire space play out, given the fact that there's huge proliferation of? Is that a great sign? Not a great sign? Are you worried about it?
It is a good sign as far as equity as an asset class is getting popular, because in this country still 4 to 5% are people who are actually putting money in equity. So and the comfort of a millennial, and now even the comfort of a senior citizen with the click, we can see that in the last 3 months we have seen that comfort with the click, that you are sitting at home and you are buying stock. And then the advent of the online brokerages, where you, if you look at the Zerodhas and Upstocks of the world, and the kind of education they are teaching you actually how to trade, and when you can go and buy things at an Amazon and a Flipkart, you can buy stocks also. I think that is the feeling now, and so that is welcome to that extent. But yes, the right kind of knowledge, the right kind of education, the right kind of temperament, because the temperament is very, very important when you get into the stocks. And I think that they will realize, not now, maybe after some time, maybe a month later, because the journey has been going up, and the kind of product which they are expecting from the industry are also going to help. Like Radhika talked about a simple debt fund, because people are not comfortable with putting everything in FD, and now somebody tells them the inflation is 6%, and then they go and check up with the branch head. He said no, the FD rate is also 6%. So if that is so maybe they need some different product, and people and then get these millennials are very comfortable with the direct platform. So say with the ET money, they are so comfortable that just while playing and while transferring money, they are investing in some arbitrage fund, some other fund. So I think that comfort is also there. So I think all this is helping in one way, that yes, they are comfortable with the asset class. And on the second side, if you took the caution, yes, it is slightly scary also. Maybe at some point of time they will realize that this is not the right way, that they are not going to buy shirts and trousers, they are buying stocks. But that is it. That is what we have to accept. And over a period of things, these things change. Now the industry has to think how to tap into this pool. Now brokerages have done that. Brokerages have seen that. And if you go to any B school, so I go and go to many B schools for some guest lectures, and at the end of each session, every kid will ask me about the derivative, about the F&O space. So they are so excited about these things. So I think that is another reason that they sometimes the mutual fund SIP looks so simple. Even if you tell them that it is rupee cost averaging and this takes care of the volatility and this is a basket, there is a fund manager who is doing, they want to do themselves. So that is the psyche of the youngster today.
So Kalpen and Radhika, you guys have serious challenges coming in if that's the kind of investor getting prepared over the next few years. So I'm going to ask my last question. After that, we'll open it up to some of the panels that are on the panel, some of the questions that come. Radhika, this is a question for you, and I wanted to speak about, Shishir right at the start spoke about a slide where he said that profitability has now moved up to 50,000 crores and 60,000 crores. I remember when we put together the business plan for Axis Mutual Fund, it was at 10,000 crores. So clearly there has been this big shift on profitability. And so I have two questions. On profitability, do you see that happening in the business? And does size matter in our industry? What is your take on that? I'll start with the second question first. Does size matter in our industry?
So I think size matters in our industry more than it should. We are ultimately in the business of managing money for consumers, and we are in the business of doing it well. Size is a function of many, many things. And I hate the word. I've seen Edelweiss at all kinds of rank from 38 to 15. I don't know what big, medium, small, mid-small is. I think size is a function of the choices you make. It is a function of when the promoters chose to start the business. It is a function of when they chose to put capital in the business. It is a function of whether they have chosen to go after institutional and liquid fund money, which there is nothing wrong with, but there is a choice that they have made. And there are many, many high-quality fund houses who run very small sizes, but run very, very high-quality businesses. So I think size is a function of the choices that people have made. And I don't think, I think the industry judges itself too much on size, unfortunately. However, that said, I am very encouraged by the fact that, despite so many foreign players exiting the industry today, we still have 45 mutual fund companies, which means a lot of new people have entered and more people continue to enter. So this industry, everything said and done, is still, for whatever reasons, exciting for new people to set up businesses. I'm also very encouraged by the fact over the last 3 years that if you build a quality mid-sized franchise and, without taking names, then you have the ability to gain size. So if you focused on building a niche or building good quality funds and you've done well for consumers, you will grow. You may grow a little late, you may grow a little less, but you will grow. And I think our experience and many people's experience has shown that that is possible. So to me, that is very, very encouraging. I also think, Karan, that 10, 15 years ago, size was a huge advantage because it meant access, it meant marketing budgets, it meant a lot of that stuff. Now in the internet era that we live in, a lot of that information has become democratized. Direct has become larger. A lot more purchases are happening digitally. And I think in the post-COVID world anyway, this whole notion of how many branches do I have, it matters, but I still think it matters less because in the digital age that you live in, you can have a branch anywhere through digital means. And I think even media and information is becoming far more democratized. So size matters to the industry. It should not matter. But I think it is possible to build a high quality franchise if you know what you're doing by doing your work consistently well. I think our second question is on profitability. I was hearing that discussion. I think one thing that is a reality is that fees are coming down for all of us, whether it is asset managers or distributors. They're coming down globally, passive, active, whatever it is. So revenues will be under pressure. And will be what they are. I think all of us in our boardrooms, and we certainly think about it, is how can we build businesses that are very cost efficient? In our case, I think, we started this expansion journey 3 years ago and we've kept our teams very, very lean. We don't want to even expand all the way to the full T30 in terms of our reach. So we are keeping our cost structure very lean because, as I said, in the digital world, you don't need to maintain that kind of cost structure. So that's my view on profitability. It will kick in. We turned break even last year at an asset base of about 20,000 crores, despite the spend on Bharat Bond. So I think if you build a lean structure, you can hit break even and become meaningfully profitable. But you just have to rethink how you want to build, whether you need a 500-person team anymore.
Got it. So why don't we do one thing? We can switch to the Q&A and the chats, some that have appeared out here, and I'll quickly, Shishir, can you just read through some of the questions? Mine is not popping.
Sure. So I think there was one question on distribution, how the insurance industry has benefited while leveraging the bank distribution. How can mutual funds, do this? Can they use the bank distribution channels better? Was one question. Maybe a linked question which we can take also, and though I think some of you touched upon it also, is how can the mutual fund industry incentivize distributors to really think from the customer's goals perspective and manage the short-term economics of the sale versus a long-term what's right for the customer. So maybe these are two distribution questions. Maybe if we can open to the house, and then there are a couple of other ones which I'll pick after this.
On the one as far as the banking channel distribution is concerned, Kalpen, do you want to take that?
Look at the difficult ones to me.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think, of course, banks have the reach that funds don't have to start with. And they also have the customers because most wealthy customers are a part of every bank. So it's very natural to plug and play, but then it comes at a cost because obviously banks have invested in these branches and they would want to have their pound of flesh as well. So what part of that distribution pool can be profitable, is something that is always a matter of debate. That are you really getting profitable assets or not? And incentives drive behavior all over the world. The entire human race is driven by incentives. Everyone wants evolution is nothing about self-interest first. So I think in every industry, including our self-interest will always be first, and that is something that investors should also know. So investors should also start keeping in mind that what are the right questions I should ask at all points in time, so that my interests are also guarded. I feel with evolution of technology and the fact that what Radhika mentioned, every individual today has a mobile. The ability to reach the consumer is not an issue anymore. Today we can reach the consumer through a bank branch, through stock exchange platforms, through digital platforms like Zerodha and Paytm and ATMoney and many more which are emerging, through our own website. So I think the pipelines are all in place. The challenge to solve for now is how do we talk the language that the consumer understands, and how do we explain to customers the right principles of risk and reward, and then finally give them good experience. Comparing insurance sales on bank platforms to mutual fund sales is to some extent not fully comparable because the economics are very different. The economics are 10, 20, 30 times different. There are many products that we have which are 10 basis points से लेके 100 basis point of revenue for a bank platform, but a mutual fund insurance product could be giving 10 to 20%. So that is a bigger challenge, and to that extent, banks also will have to pick and choose what makes sense. But to be also fair, there is anyways acceptance that some money in my portfolio should be in mutual fund. A customer knows that, and even a bank knows that I need to give allocation to insurance, I need to give allocation to mutual fund, I need to give allocation to fixed deposit, and likewise. So today, for example, I don't think banks make a lot of money in sovereign gold bonds, but my bank RM calls me always for sovereign gold bond. He never calls me for equity fund or debt fund, and I ask him, you make no money in a sovereign gold bond, but still you're recommending it. But you make 1% in an equity fund, still you're not recommending it. So it's not that banks always sell where there's commission, but they also sell wherever there is better productivity of their efforts, and it's going to be always a tug of war between economics and what makes sense for the whole ecosystem. The last thing is what type of incentives can create good distribution. So again, this debate of good distribution, bad distribution is universal. There are good funds, there are bad funds. There are good distributors, there are bad distributors. There are good human beings, there are bad human beings. There are good fund managers, there are bad fund managers. So in everything, this is good and bad. We have to keep working towards the fact that, I always think that how do I get advantage of being in that part of distribution which is more aligned, which is more client friendly, which is more AMC friendly, and where my economics is also win-win economics. Likewise, if I am a distributor, tomorrow if I set up shop, I will always ask this question: where can I make more profit? Where can I make more money for my client as well as for myself? So the balance is important, and we have to put put our own efforts to find what is that right balance. So like Radhika mentioned, different models will flourish. There will be some models where AMC managements will say that let me not be the largest AUM market share, but let me be the largest profit share in the next 5 years. So that will be a model. There will be some models but who generate more profits than the 7th mutual fund in the country, who have more profitability than, and that segment of customers is only the top HNIs and the global clients. They don't cater to the retail markets in India. So different models will evolve, and there is space for all. Ultimately, sharpshooting, segmenting which segment I want to be in will take a. So there is an Apple which sells less instruments but makes the highest profits, and there is Samsung which makes more instruments but still makes less profit. So there is room for all models. Each company will pick and choose what it wants and play it out.
So I think I'll probably ask the last question and then we'll end it here. And that can be just a minute's feedback from everyone. In this pandemic, the one industry that has kind of worked 24/7 has actually been the mutual fund industry. Obviously related to that is the stock market. But there's also been one very big shift, which is this whole shift towards digital. Now, as CEOs, I have this question now for Radhika, Kalpana, and for Arun. Your views on how this shift has taken place, and do you think that's the future from your point of view? And this is not about direct or distribution, just the whole shift towards digital. And we'll end with your closing remarks on this aspect, and then I'll hand it back to Shishir.
I would just like to say, sorry, Radhika, sorry, go ahead. No, your turn.
No, I think it's the best thing that's happened since COVID. I think if we go back to the pre-COVID world, then all of us have learned nothing after COVID. And I think the move towards digital, and I don't just mean distribution, I even think the way we operate, the fact that we've done so many conferences and large group meetings that many of us on this call, I'm sure Kalpana and I was traveling 3 days a week on average to do meetings. The fact that while we joke and make fun of the webinars, so much of this has happened digitally, I think it's fantastic. I probably have reached a lakh of people personally in the last few months. If I had to imagine doing that physically, it would have been crazy. So I think digital has just taken our reach up. And I mean, what gives me the most heart is that I remember in Bharat Bond 1, to raise that amount of money, it took me 50 physical trips to Delhi. In Bharat Bond 2, we didn't even have to open our offices. Not a single human being went to office, and we raised the same amount of money. So I think that gives me great heart for the future.
Excellent. Kalpana, you were saying something.
Yeah, I think I reinforce the same thing that Radhika mentioned, that our future is brighter. If it is digital, if it is not, and the fund industry does not transform in this cycle, this should not be short-lived, because there is a huge tendency to revert back to old trends of doing work. I keep getting emails from a lot of unique brokers who say that let the economy restart, please reopen your branches, and we have to guide them to say that getting huge health risk and today. So this is probably our DMAT moment. If in the next 1 year, if we cannot move to 100% paperless transaction, we would have lost a golden opportunity to create huge efficiencies and economies of scale for mutual funds, for investors and distributors all put together. This can be a great leap that the industry could make, and which I think we should have done 5 years back or 10 years back. That market operates without a piece of paper being exchanged. Why should mutual fund be any different? And we can find solutions for some of the things that are not currently being solved, but that can be solved for once the mindset shifts digital. So I agree with what Radhika is saying, complete transformation.
So I agree with Kalpana and Radhika, and I think one thing we should understand that humans are resilient and adaptable. So there is a hope now. And second, as I said, that the comfort with click, that is what has happened. And crisis has created this opportunity, And even if you look at the virtual digital education, people are learning so much. But only one caution here. I'm saying digital at the fore, human at the core. That we should never forget. I think we will win.
Excellent. Shishir, back to you. I've had a good time talking to my friends and colleagues. In case you have any other questions for them, go ahead.
No, I think we had a great discussion. Frankly, I know when we were setting this up, all of you made fun of the consultant slides. And I think actually it's great to reflect that we did not talk about the nuts and bolts of the business, but I think we spoke so much about the customer and what can we do to really add value to the customer. I actually feel very confident, and I have had nothing to complain from the industry. We've always invested in mutual funds. So I have actually walked away with a lot of confidence that so long as we keep finding ways to make money for the customer, we will make this journey from 25 trillion rupees to 50 trillion rupees or wherever our rightful place in the sun should be. Thank you so much to the panelists. It was great learning from you and listening to you. And thank you so much for the panelists. You've been a great audience. Some questions remain unanswered. Please feel free to reach out to us and we'll sort of take those offline. So once again, thanks a bunch, folks. Absolute pleasure. Technology does so many good things. This was certainly one of those. Thank you so much.